Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Undercurrent News webinar on the role of fish meal and fish oil in the growing aquaculture industry. I'm very pleased to, first of all, I'd just like to mention some gratitude to our sponsor for this webinar, F3, and which is an innovation challenge for new ingredients to replace marine ingredients. And we're always very grateful for sponsors for these webinars. So what I'll do, I'll just get every great guest today, and I'd just like to introduce everybody who's on this webinar. So I'll start with you, Kevin. If you'd like to just briefly introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Kevin Fitzsimmons. I'm a professor at the University of Arizona, environmental science. And most of my research for the last 40 years has dealt with sustainability of aquaculture. And I did a term as president of the World Aquaculture Society back in 2004.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I'll go to Enrico. If you introduce yourself.
Yes. Thanks so much. I'm Enrico Bachis. I'm the Market Research Director for IFFO, the Marine Ingredients Organization. I've been working for them for 12 years, and basically I'm in charge of all the market intelligence that is produced by our organization for our members and also for the outside world.
Great, thank you. I'll now go to Dominique.
I'm Dominique. I'm a professor of animal nutrition and aquaculture at the University of Guelph in Canada. And I'm a co-founder of the company Aqua, which is a technology provider developing software for the feed industry and the aquaculture industry globally.
Thank you, Dominique. And finally, Luis.
Hello, everyone. My name is Luis Rens. I'm ex-commercial vice president for TASA, one of the biggest fish meal, fish oil producers in Peru. Over the two plus years I worked there, I had the opportunity to develop a lot of customer relationships and to kind of fine-tune our selling of fish meal in terms of looking at what particular fish meals work in which feed sector. So really looking forward to speaking with everybody today. Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks very much. So I'll just give a reminder to the audience about the format that we usually do with these webinars. I will start with a brief presentation, which I hope will not take any more than 10 minutes. And I'll start by asking a couple of questions to each of the panelists, or better said, one question each. And I'd really encourage the audience to send questions through, because I like to get to the outside audience questions as quickly as possible. So we'll take up the full hour and perhaps a few additional minutes if we have lots of questions. I know that we've got a nice audience today, so we should get through some really interesting topics. So I'm going to do my presentation, and I have to apologize for a croaky voice, but I was shouting at a television screen for about 120 minutes yesterday. The role of fish meal and fish oil in a growing aquaculture industry. This is one of the most viewed graphics in the seafood industry. The aquaculture industry taking off in the 1970s, and as most people in these industries know, over time aquaculture volumes have grown to a level where the tonnage looks pretty similar to the capture fisheries. And this has put a strain on some of the carnivorous types of species that eat fish meal and fish oil as part of their diet. As the R&I manager at Leroy Seafood said, these are coming from fully explored or overexploited fish stocks. And Dominique, who's on this call, showed me a presentation yesterday, and obviously replacing these ingredients requires other animal ingredients or high-end additives, and replacing these ingredients is not that easy. Scarcity has driven prices up, and prices are quite volatile because of sporadic events. So we've seen El Nino, which affects about a third of world supply that comes from Chile and Peru, really driving prices, and especially over the last few years, we've seen production decline, but especially during this a lengthy El Nino. So South America accounts for about a third of world production. The coastline here in Chile, where I'm speaking from, does quite a bit, and Peru has the main resource in the Pacific Ocean. And more than 80% of the Peruvian resource goes to China. I'll be very keen to ask Luis about this experience working at TASA. A lot of China also imports fish meal from many other parts of the world, and really is the dominant buyer. So half of global fish meal supply is certified by Marine Trust. So it's actually a sustainable resource, at least in terms of 50% of world supply. And unfortunately, the other half, the non-certified supply, it does give aquaculture a bad reputation. And I'd love to talk more to, I'm definitely going to ask Kevin Fitzsimmons about this. But there are things happening. Mauritania, one of the main producers from West Africa, recently began an FIP, and that's encouraging. And also that there are demands now coming from the retail side to improve this aspect of the industry. So, for example, the ASC, the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, will start to certify feed from this year, actually, and it will become an integral part of its farm certification as of 2022. So what we've seen over time is the inclusion rates into salmon, for example, have really dropped to about as low as they can go. We've seen, for example, fish oil inclusion drop to about 10%. This obviously raises the question of how much of a role this plays in fish health, and if it's making a difference with mortality rates. And also, of course, the other aspect of this is the omega-3 claim that is often promoted to consumers. So the alternatives are coming. There's several initiatives. But there's also, and this is something I'll ask Enrico about, but there's also trimmings, krill, and there are more marine ingredients that could actually form part of a sustainable volume. So if we talk about the novel ingredients, and today's webinar, I really want to talk more about the actual fish meal and fish oil industry. But of course, the alternatives are an essential part of this conversation. We've seen quite a big uptake in algae oil, particularly in Norway. There are companies developing these ingredients that are really quite advanced. They're often multinational companies, but we're also seeing the startup world, especially in insects, get really attract venture capital, and this is one of the really interesting new sources of supply that could develop in the next few years. So this is a topic I really want to get into today. We've seen in the previous century, fish meal and fish oil were really commodities, and the strategic the strategy of any commodity producer, of course, is to be the lowest cost producer. But I think now, as the supplies are strained, people are now looking at these industries more as a strategic ingredient, and producers are now asking questions: who are our customers, and what are they buying? And I think this is part of this transition to a new market. So thank you very much, and I don't want to speak anymore, and I'd like to get into the questions. So I think. Is my screen? My screen's off. Yeah, that's great. So I think I'll start with you, Enrico. I just wondered, IFFO does many studies on these markets, and I wondered if you could just give us an overview of how you see supply and demand, and especially the ability of fisheries, capture fisheries, and aquaculture to actually use trimmings and more sustainable ingredients to boost supply?
Thank you, Matt. In terms of supply, we see a situation which is, to be honest, pretty stable on average. I mean, if you take 10 years or 20 years average, you will see that more or less we are always producing the same amount of fish meal and fish oil every year, which at this point is 5 million metric tons of fish meal and 1 million metric tons of fish oil on average. So in terms of supply, yeah, we can certainly say that our products are supplied in a finite way, but it's stable. Although we keep listening to reports or interpretation that would like to portray our supply as declining. That's the first point. In terms of sustainability, you mentioned already that more than 50% of the global supply is already certified as responsibly sourced, and obviously we never wasted any time to drive change also in the rest of the industry. And that is why we have been working together with many countries, with the local stakeholders, looking for help from organizations such as the UNFAO. And right now, actually, we have 6 FIPs, so fishery improvements programs around the world that are trying to work also on that part that is still not in that 51%.
Great, thanks. I'd like to ask you, Kevin, in terms of your view on the fish meal and fish oil supply, and kind of perhaps talk a little bit about the other 50% and what that looks like. We've had a conversation recently, and you mentioned that you've just come back from a lengthy stay in Southeast Asia, and you've kind of seen this uncertified supply up close, and I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, and this is really a huge problem in most parts of Asia where there aren't very many certified fisheries. The overfishing is rampant. The quality of the fish meal is abysmal. It's really difficult when feed formulators, feed mills try to work with the product that's available. The prices are extremely volatile. Quality is poor in many cases. And this includes some of the biggest aquaculture countries. I mean, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh are dealing with this on a daily basis. And the supplies from those countries and the places they buy from are fishing down the food chain. They're taking any small fish that they can get. We have all kinds of labor issues with the industry. I mean, I applaud IFFO for the work that they're doing with the FIPS and other groups trying to address this, and especially places like Mauritania, rest of Africa. But there's lots of documented cases where there's corruption involved, countries that we know of, all of us do, who are IUU practitioners, if you will. So it's really a huge problem that I really applaud IFFO for trying to address it, but it's going to be a problem that's going to be with us for a long time.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'm sure we'll revisit some of this when we get audience questions. Dominique, I wanted to ask you about just the kind of nutritional profile of fish meal and fish oil. And I'm familiar with the Retire Aqua story as well, where you are doing independent studies on feed ingredients. And I'd just like to get your view on the importance of these ingredients and how realistically they can be replaced.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue of nutrition. So the animal requires nutrients. There's a variety of nutrients that are contained or supplied by all the ingredients. And fish meal is an excellent source of a number of key nutrients, fish meal and fish oil. We're talking long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, DHA, especially DHA, which are only found in very few feed resources. There's some new that are coming online. Fish meal will be a source of cholesterol. It will be a source of organic minerals or micro minerals that are really quite important. We can replace those, but we do have to seek them in different forms, and often they're quite expensive in the form. There's also aspects of fish meal that we don't understand. A small amount of fish meal, a small amount of fish oil sometimes has beneficial effect above and beyond what we understand about the nutrition. I've seen this in a number of trials. We cover all the base and it seems to be so. So really fish meal, and especially is like I mentioned, it's quite difficult to replace without high-end alternatives to it. So you're replacing one problem with another problem, right? Or in terms of cost, at least in terms of production costs and issues of supply.
Right. Thanks. And Luis, I wanted to ask you, particularly coming from TASA, the largest supplier in the world, and I think one of the companies that is certified by IFFO. Could you talk a little bit about how these industries are kind of moving from a commodity industry to the seller of a strategic ingredient, where I think companies in Peru are starting to kind of ask questions about who their potential customers are, and just talk about that process.
Sure. Thanks, Matt, for the question. So first of all, you have to kind of look back at history, and a lot of Peruvian fish meal used to be sold in bulk shipments to China and sold through a couple of traders that were based in Hong Kong, and it was a very arm's length contractual relationship, and the Peruvians had not much idea of where the fish meal was going, what it was being used for, other than it's for compound feed. That has evolved over time. The Peruvian companies have gone. I mean, obviously, they had started having a relationship with the Chilean feed companies and the European feed companies, especially on the aqua side. But more and more, they started developing relationships directly with the large feed companies. Haida, Grow Best, Tongwei, large on the aqua side, but also big companies like Twins and others on the pig feed side. And over time, we've learned, we've figured out kind of where, Peruvian fish meal goes. And we're very lucky in Peru. We have a single species, biomass. So that allows us to have a relatively stable quality of fish meal. It's not always perfectly stable, but it's relatively stable. And so you can really we've discovered over the time that, our fish meal is really on the higher end. And so you need to look for the customers that make feed for higher end, I'm going to say animals or fish. For example, there's no point putting a Peruvian fish meal in a catfish feed diet, because catfish is so cheap that you're going to make the feed become too expensive. So you have to look at those the kind of the more niche segments. And we consider those to be, for example, carnivorous species or high-end aqua species. And so we had mapped out where are all the species that we're very relevant for, and where we should be selling our super prime fish meal. Because just for the audience to know, Peruvian fish meal can be split into several different qualities, of which the most expensive one is called super prime. Actually, and then comes prime, Taiwan, Thailand, and standard. These all have different levels, different parameters. For example, the protein, ash, and others, and fats and others, and TVN. And so if you can figure out which of your customers really need your product, for example, Peruvian fish meal in baby pigs is critical. After the 3 weeks after the baby pigs are born, when they start switching to a diet that has fish meal in it, and that was particularly important during the African swine fever period, when even though overall demand dropped because in China that segment, the pig industry would consume about over 600,000 tons of fish meal a year. That dropped because the herd got culled almost 50%. But the inclusion rates within the diets for baby pigs increased because they wanted to make sure that the baby pigs would survive, because the price of pig was going through the roof because there were any more pigs, and the number one preferred meat in China is pigs. So I think ourselves as TASA, but I think others in the industry have understood, hey, I have a very high quality fish meal. I need to place it where it's valued, where the feed is a very high quality feed. And you have to know which segments those are. And it takes time. It takes time, and you have to learn to get to know your customers. It's no longer an arm's length contractual relationship. It's really, how can we work together? How can the feed company open its kimono a bit or its doors a bit and say, listen, I'm willing to discuss more of the nutritional elements of your product, because to be fair, the Peruvian companies had never really focused on what is the nutritional value of our feed, other than kind of knowing what the protein levels and a few things like that. And I think that's changing now. I think there's a lot more focus on, we need to know how good our product is. Right.
That's good. And I just wanted to, before we go any further, I want to make another just another announcement to everybody listening, that you're most welcome to give us questions, and we'll get to outside audience Q&A as soon as possible. I'll just do one more for Dominique. In terms of how low inclusion rates can go, where do you see the different feed? I think you said in species such as carp, it goes down to maybe about 4%, salmon maybe about 10%. Do you think that these farmers can stretch the marine ingredients inclusion any lower than now?
Oh, definitely. So, I mean, the industry has been stretching a fixed supply of fish meal, basically, while the industry has expanded tremendously. In omnivorous fish feeds, so we're talking tilapia, the different species of carp, I see in practical feed formulation today anywhere between 0.5% to 3% fish meal use. And we're talking kind of grower kind of finishing the end of the phase. The younger the animal are, the more fish meal we use, but the volumes of those feed is less. So in terms of absolute amount of fish meal used, it's quite minimal. In salmon feed, I've seen as low as, in practical feeds, 5%, 7% in the last phase, let's say from 2 kilograms to 5 kilograms. Some companies are able to go to 5, 7, 8%. I would say probably, if you do an average, probably around 10%, 12% in that water, which is a lot less than what was used. And when it got started in the early 1990s, it was a typical Norwegian salmon feed with 70% fish meal, 20% fish oil, and 10% wheat, or 20% wheat and 10% fish oil. So the industry has changed tremendously and have been using resource. So when I talk about replacement, I'm talking about complete replacement is difficult. Some replacement is actually very easy. There's a number, it's been done, and it's being done on a daily basis. So depending on the species, depending on the size of the species, level of fish meal, like full revolve, like say between 1 to 15%, depending on the species type, which is considerably less than when we got started just a few decades ago. And as new, like I mentioned, feed additives are coming on the market, whether it's the algae oil, whether it's the insect, whether it's the fermentation product, the bacteria, different things, that will actually, or krill or other kind of high-end marine ingredients, hydrolysates and the like, we will be able to remove more and more of the fish meal in a diet. But at some point in time, it becomes just an economical issue. Do I go for an additive that costs $7 a kilogram to replace something that costs me $2 a kilogram, right? $2.50 a kilogram. So it becomes an economical decision. So or a value decision. We decide to replace fish meal because of the whatever societal concerns and all this. But then in the end, you have to compensate with the price increase of your product.
Right. Thank you. Enrico, I was keen to ask you on the ability of both capture fisheries and aquaculture to increase the supply of trimmings, especially, and kind of waste streams from aquaculture industries. How much? I think the trimmings are about a third of total supply. Do you see scope for more supply coming from these sources?
Okay, but first of all, I'd like to specify one aspect that I don't think is clear here. When we say that more than 50% is certified, that doesn't mean that the rest is not sustainable. or is not responsibly sourced. It just means that there is not a framework, a legal framework that allows those companies operating in those areas to be certified, which is different. So what we are trying to do is to help all those places to get to that point where the legal framework is there, all the measures are in there, so that companies working in a responsible manner are recognized for what they're doing. Going back to your question, right now, yes, we estimate that 30% of the global supply of fishmeal and fish oil is produced by byproducts, and that is thanks to the fact that we are becoming better and better at recovering this precious raw material that's in the past it used to be just wasted. It wasn't considered as useful, or there was not the technology to use it. Now we have the technology, we are getting better, and actually that is a side of the market that has a lot of potential, as you said, because more and more actually these byproducts can be recovered and reused for marine ingredients. According to the FAO, and we agree with that estimate, by 2030 we might actually have 35% of the global supply of marine ingredients coming from byproducts. The other aspect that we are also introducing in parallel with the byproducts, and that we probably can say something more specific than the company work for, is that many of our members have been able to improve the utilization of the raw material. So with the same amount of raw material, nowadays they can produce more fish meal and fish oil because they have managed to improve the yields. So that is also something that we might give some balance to the growth of the byproducts.
Right. And do you think there's scope for that efficiency to apply into the industry still? Or would you say that efficiency reached its maximum level?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a technician. I just know that we see this constant improvement. So who knows? Maybe, yeah, they can still go up and up.
Right. Thanks. Kevin, if you look at the global aquaculture industry, and I know that you're a global expert on, for example, the tilapia industry especially, and some of these species could really take off and become more of the protein supply in the world. What's your view on how we find the ingredients to basically underpin this growth?
Sure. First of all, we need to go back and recognize that most of the aquaculture in the world are these species. The carps, the tilapias, the catfish, as Dominique mentioned, they provide most of the seafood in the world, not farmed salmon, which is really a small portion when we look globally. And most of those species, as Dominique correctly pointed out, have very little demand for fish meal or fish oil. And in much of the world, they don't use any fish meal or fish oil. Most of the carp in China are fed with other ingredients. So a huge part of the world doesn't use any fish meal, fish oil for aquaculture. And as Enrico said, I mean, the more that we can take byproducts and use them as a source of fish meal and fish oil is great. But again, when we look at Asia, there's very little of that byproduct. What they leave after the family consumes a carp or a tilapia is some skin and bones. There's not much you're going to recover out of that. And even in the West, the companies are getting more and more efficient all the time at recovering edible product, whether it's fish sticks or fish balls. The quality of fish meal that comes from processed is all over the place. Usually it's high in phosphorus, things like this. So it's not going to be, obviously we've taken all the protein off when we take the fillets off. So it's not going to be a really high quality product, but whatever we can get, I'm all for. I mean, I think if you want to call it the rendering of aquatic livestock, we should recover that and use that. And if there's disease concerns, we use it for baby pigs. If we're worried about any kind of pathogens or anything, As Luis pointed out, there's plenty of demand for fish meal outside of aquaculture. So I think that there's going to be plenty of demand for these products. I wish it was higher quality from the rendered product, but there's still plenty of demand for that. And as the global industry continues to increase, as Dominic pointed out, the percentage of fish meal, fish oil is going to continue to decrease as more and more alternatives come online, and it will certainly be an economic decision. And as these different ingredients come on board and people look at least cost feed formulations, these various alternatives, whether they're microbial meals or plant-based or insect-based, algae-based, are going to factor into those economic equations. And as they keep scaling up, their prices are going to come down. Fish meal is, as we've seen, hasn't come down forever. It's an expensive ingredient, and the next farmer I meet who says fish feed prices are too low will be the very first one I've ever met. Every fish farmer says feed is too expensive. It's their major cost in most cases. So anything that can be done that will lower the cost, provide more ingredients, more options, is going to benefit aquaculture.
Right. Could you, Kevin? Could you just give a very brief overview of how you see the alternatives? Because the F3 really looks at all of those. What stage they are in their development.
Yeah, certainly. And again, F3, we don't have any vested interest in any of these alternatives. We're not trying to pick winners or losers. Our goal really is to just educate the industry about how quickly these alternatives are coming on board. As was already mentioned, the algae oils already are taking a significant portion of the market. Their prices are coming down. Their volumes are increasing very quickly, as an example. And so that's one that, that's ready for prime time. That's commercially viable today. Also, as you pointed out, the insect meals, the amount of venture capital that's going into that is crazy. It seems like every month somebody's building the world's biggest insect farm, and the tonnage that are coming out of these operations is truly impressive. The microbial meals, again, we've got huge companies. I mean, the big petroleum companies and people like that are investing in these new ingredients, and people are adjusting feedstock so that they can dial in the nutritional value of these different meals, whether it be insect or algae or microbes. The yeast and fermentation people, they're jumping all the time at how they can adjust the nutrient profile of their products. So if you had to grade them, I'd say algae oil is probably the first one. Some of these different fermentation products is probably the second biggest, maybe even bigger in volume, but maybe not in value because oil is so valuable. Then the insect people, and then probably the microbial are the ones maybe bringing up the rear, but maybe in the long run would provide the biggest tonnage.
Right. Thanks very much. So now we've got several questions from the audience, and I'll just start to ask some of these to our panelists. So I'll start with you, Dominique. Flavio Corsin has asked, can you comment on the difference in quality between fish meal from capture fisheries and fish meal from byproducts?
Oh, very good question. I mean, the aquaculture byproducts, fish meal, have gained a lot of ground over the past few years. We're talking salmon meal and salmon oil, basa fish meal or basa fish oil, catfish oil, and things like that. Have taken over many parts that have been quite used. These aquaculture products in general are lower in omega-3, long chain omega-3 fatty acids than the wild marine product, but we have to be careful because the wild fisheries products are also variable in composition, depending on the species, the seasons. Like Kevin was saying, that depends how they're processed. We was mentioned also that, I mean, the quality even of one species can be some degree of variability. You can have different grades of product. So it's very difficult to paint a picture with a broad brush, right? Brush stroke. But in general, the fish meal from aquaculture are low. It is. If you're dealing with fish meal from a freshwater omnivorous fish species, you'll find very, very low level of DHA, some levels, but very low, very, very low level. In terms of amino acids, it doesn't really matter. What matters is really the, like Kevin was saying, if you make a fish meal out of bones and frames and head and skin, you'll have a very different amino acid profile, which is not so good compared to a fish meal that's made from a small fish that is whole, contain lots of muscles and gut as a proportion of the fish meal. But that's not difficult to assess. You just analyze the amino acid composition and you plug this in your feed formulation program and you take this into account. Same thing for the EPA and DHA. You analyze it, you basically populate your ingredient database, that's what feed manufacturers do, and you formulate on that basis, and then you use complementary ingredients, right, to meet the requirements of the animal. So the fish meal from aquaculture byproducts are extremely valuable. It's funny because you go to Indonesia and you find salmon meal from Chile, right? Salmon meal, even salmon oil, especially salmon oil from Chile. And then you go to Chile or other place and you find catfish meal from Vietnam or something like this. So it's really quite interesting how the world is going.
Right, thank you. And there's a question on if basically at which stage the alternatives can really kick in. And I think, Luis, I'll ask you this question. Yourselves at TASA, were you sort of looking at models at which these alternatives would effectively come in and take some market share in agriculture?
I guess for us, because of the quality of Peruvian fish meal, it was never so much a concern that we're going to be replaced. I think it's about being complementary, different ingredients being complementary. Ourselves knowing that, but also ourselves knowing. I should preface that also by saying that, again, we look at the different species. So, you know, will Peruvian fish meal be a large factor, for example, in Vaname shrimp farming in the future? I think we're going to get substituted a little bit more there. But will we get substituted in yellow croaker or yellowtail kingfish in Japan? You know, not so much because of those higher levels of quality. So I think, you know, when we look at, you know, by 2030 we need so much protein. You know, you're gonna need these alternatives because as much as the Peruvian industry has had we've had a relatively stable biomass the last couple of years, and actually this last biological year, which is from November to about now, is almost 40% better than the previous biological year. You never quite know. So I think there's a lot of opportunity within the industry to something that we haven't mentioned at all is the technology that we could use, like the Internet of Things, data analytics. There's a lot of things being done to make the factories more efficient in terms of not just trying to get the most out of the fish itself, although obviously we've tried to do that, but I think we're coming close to a point where most of the Peruvian industry has gotten very close to maximizing the recovering just about every amount of protein they have in some of the water that brings the fish in, for example. So I think they're kind of good there, but the next frontier, I think, is how do you improve the quality of the fish meal and try to make as much super prime as you can, and that's a really high quality fish meal that like Dominique mentions has some really great nutritional factors, which you can then mix in with either lower quality fish meal or insect meal or something else. So and I believe, and actually I was told by my customers in China, well, no, we already do that. I mean, yes, I'll use you in as proven fish meal in a certain percentage, but then I've got all these other fish meals that I'm using as well in the same feed formula. And I know that you're going to give me this level of amino acids and a few other factors that they wouldn't tell us what they were. But I can also use fish meal from from much lower quality, even from byproduct meal as well, to optimize that formula. So it's a case of those companies figuring out how to create the appropriate mix of ingredients in that feed formula that hits their price point. Because again, it's always that feed formula, that secret feed, calculation they have that allows them to get that price point that works for their aquaculture marketplace. Right.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask you, what's your outlook for the Peruvian industry over the next year or two? Obviously, I think there's a better prospect biologically. What's your take on Peru particularly?
So on the biomass side, things look quite good. We had the last fishing season, which was just about to wrap up. So Center North 2021 was actually the government kind of withheld some of the amount of quota they could have given because the biomass was very, very healthy, which surprised a lot of people. The thought was it'd be more around a 3 million quota, and it ended up being 2.5. So, but that tells you the government is keeping an eye on the biomass, and along with IMARPE and the Minister of Production, they're managing that biomass. So I think from that perspective, we're okay. Will a Nino happen? Probably. I think, the last one was 2017. So at some point we're due for another one. The challenge right now is political. The presidential elections are about to be determined in the next week or so, but not from the voting. The voting's been done since June 6th. Now it's really a case of tabulating and the votes and ensuring that any votes that were protested against are getting analyzed to make sure there's no fraud. But the way it looks like we'll probably have a communist government, and that always scares industry because there's a big history of industries being nationalized in Peru. The fishing industry was nationalized; it almost killed it. And so, could that happen again? Maybe. So that's something that we'll have to evaluate as the July 28th is when the next president will be sworn in. And we'll have to see where who his Minister of Production is and what they plan. Because for an industry that brings in so much dollar revenue, maybe they'll bring about $1 billion in of revenue with this fishing season. That will draw the attention of the government. After the copper mining, and agriculture, the fish meal industry has a target on its back. So that has to be factored in. We just have to see where that goes.
Right. Thanks very much. And Enrico, I'd like to ask you a question on, there's questions on developing feeds using other marine ingredients. It's something we have sort of touched on already, but I just wondered if you had any view on, there are potential resources with mesopelagic resources. If this is something that the IFFO has a view on, and if you think that supply can be boosted from that. Sources.
Yeah, no, we are obviously following very closely these new potential sectors. The krill is already, I think, a reality. Very, very, very sustainable. They really take a small amount of the total biomass, so absolutely sustainable. And we know that there are different projects, especially in Norway, especially in South Africa, about mesopelagic. Again, they are trying to make sure that they know exactly the biomass in order to develop a process that is sustainable, and they are also trying to understand what is the best technology to use that kind of biomass, because it's a very difficult very difficult fish to catch and to preserve and to transform into something else. So clearly, yeah, those are two potential when it comes to pelagic. But again, because I hear first, I heard before that in Asia there's no recycle of raw material in terms of byproduct. It's actually not true. There are countries where actually it's there's a very high percentage. Even in China, at least 1/3 of the fish meal is produced by byproducts. In places like Vietnam, 50% of the fish meal is coming from byproducts, and 90% of the fish oil is coming from byproducts. So I think talking about Asia as a monolith is not correct. There are different situations in there as well. I could mention also the Philippines. I could mention Indonesia. Lots of byproducts used in there. And then, if you allow me, Matt, I'd like to go back to the inclusion rates because I think Luis and Kevin said two right things. You need to consider the different sections of the aquaculture sector. And clearly, based on the nature of the fish, you might have fish that can survive without fish meal, but others clearly not. The carnivorous species, they really need it. And actually, very recently, both IWOS and Bioma said that they have probably reached the minimum amount of fish meal that they can use. So they cannot go below that. That's what they said. And on the other hand, you have some salmon farmers in the Faroe Islands, in Norway, that are actually asking for feed that has more inclusion rates of fish meal and fish oil, because they find more efficient actually to have all the nutritional benefits that fish meal and fish oil provide in just one go, rather than going and looking for different ingredients that can provide the same amount of nutrition. So I think we need to look at the sector in a more detailed way. So there will be sections in which, probably, they won't need the fish meal, also because of the nature of the fish, but in others in which actually we see that they are moving towards a higher usage of marine ingredients. And that is because actually we remain competitive, and because the supply, although finite, as I said, and obviously there's no doubt about that, is clearly stable. It has been stable over time.
Right. Thanks very much. And Dominic, I was keen to ask you. There's been a couple of questions on the kind of ESG footprint of these ingredients, of fish meal and fish oil. Is this something that you have a view on? If you've measured, for example, there's one question here that, for example, if you grow 1 pound of salmon in Maine, and I think this person's talking about a land-based aquaculture farm that takes 3 pounds of fish meal from Ghana. How does that look from a carbon footprint standpoint?
Well, these computations are increasingly popular, and they're an important part of marketing of some products, some food product, and notably seafood is one of those products that are putting claims to it. Consumers are requesting this kind of information, or some consumers or some distributors are requesting that kind of information. They're extremely complex calculations, right? Because you have to consider where the ingredient came from, like the person, if you're getting fish meal from Mauritania to produce fish halfway around the world, well, you have to consider this in your equations. And a lot of the computations are done using rule of thumbs and not really true measurements of this. So you need to go from the ingredients to the feed manufacturing, how it was transported, whether the feed was made locally, because there's a limited number of feed manufacturer in North America for fish feed. So sometimes you have to ship the feed across the continent also. I know in Canada, we get feed from the West Coast and East Coast of Canada to produce rainbow trout in the center of Canada, which is thousands of kilometers shipping. You have to take this into account. And then your product, where it ends up, how it's being distributed. These numbers can be computed with a proper approach, proper tools. Whether a locally produced product will have lower footprint, you have to figure out where the ingredient came from and where your feed came from and what you did. It's not because something is produced somewhere else, right, that it will have a bigger footprint because you have to ship that product. You have to look at the entire supply chain. And these computations are quite complicated to make.
Thank you. I've got another question which I'm going to direct to Kevin. There's one somebody listening who said, "What advice would you give a startup that is doing R&D on fish meal alternatives with respect to obtaining funding for feasibility studies?"
Okay, good question. So obviously it depends somewhat in which country you're in. I mean, in the United States, there are several federal agencies that are funding this type of research. They've actually been doing it for a long time. My colleague Rick Barrows had funding from USDA and US Fish and Wildlife looking at alternatives for fish meal, mostly vegetable based. He made a whole career of it, doing it for 30 years, essentially, and showed that with the salmonids, there is no innate need for fish meal or fish oil. Economically, as several people point out, maybe you want 2-3% economically, but nutritionally, they don't need it. You need the nutrients. Whether those amino acids or fatty acids come from different sources doesn't make any more difference for a fish than it does for a human. As long as you get all the nutrition there, the ingredient does not matter. Now, we got to be sure about all the micronutrients and all the vitamins, minerals, etc. But as Dominique pointed out, there is software out there that helps us to do that. Anyway, back to the other sources. Private sector. The private sector is keen on these things, whether it's venture capital companies, whether it's big banks, whether it's big corporations. If you have a pretty good initial product, your research is looking promising, there's plenty of private sector avenues there. We have outfits like AquaSpark and Hatch and these incubator outfits that are always on the lookout for promising research and promising new products. And so these kind of angel type investors would be very keen if somebody's got a good product. And basically, I mean, we're talking, if we go to the basic of it, as Luis was pointing out, why are we worried about an ingredient about what the president's political persuasion is? And that's going to affect the aquaculture industry around the world. We have got to get away from a focus on wild capture, whether it's mesopelagic or whatever, to farmed ingredients that are not subject to who's the president or which capture method you're using or which total allowable catch for this year is going to be. That's crazy. I mean, we should not be trying to run a worldwide industry of an agricultural-based industry on harvesting wild products from nature. There's no other livestock industry that's trying to do that. So it's going to move very quickly into these alternative products that have got stable prices, stable volumes, and it'll probably be a mix of all the above. Insects, algae, microbes. I mean, look at what soy has done. The soy people 40 years ago started with some innovative products, and now it makes up whatever, 25, 30, 35% of all the aqua feed in the whole world. That's where we're going to go. Yeah.
Thank you. I think given the Enrico representing IFFOs on the call, I'd like to give you the opportunity as well to talk about this as well, the role of marine ingredients.
Yeah, no, obviously there are different issues to consider here. Just to stay with the last one, soya was mentioned. I don't know how anybody can reason and say that soya is better or more sustainable than fish meal and fish oil, considering that we can provide more than 50% as a sustainable supply, and for the soya it's 1%. I mean, I don't know how it works, but having said that, we know that marine ingredients are produced because of what Kevin said. because of the nutrients. Fish meal and fish oil, when it comes to aquafeed, can provide in one package all the nutrients that the fish need, just because in the wild, fish eat fish. That's it. Simple as that. Now we understand all the other issues clearly. That is why IFFO has been always trying to drive change in the industry. But I think here the issue is another one that has not been touched or slightly touched at the beginning of the presentation, Matt. When you were showing the fact that captured fisheries will be stable over time, so there won't be more fish coming from the wild fisheries, and more will need to come from aquaculture. Now, how do you attain that? Probably in the future, I don't know how long, Kevin is right, there will be products that can solve all the issues that all the agri-commodities and all the feed ingredients that are used now created to the feed producers. But right now, we have another issue. We have a growing population, we have a growing middle class, and all these guys will be asking for more food that you need to produce. And in terms of aquafeed, you need to produce it through the feed, which nowadays is estimated at around 60 million in the world. By 2025, is expected to be 70 million. Now, I think, given the situation, all the feed ingredients should work together in order to meet this demand. It's not a case of replacing fish meal and fish oil. It's the case of providing sustainable feed ingredients from all sides, which also means all the other ingredients need to show that they are sustainable. So carbon footprint is important, and we haven't touched that. Probably we should have done. But generally speaking, we have nothing against the novel ingredients or the other ingredients, because we are aware that there's the need for everybody here, and that we need to work together, because the demand for feed ingredients is so big that just talking about replacing what the FAO described as the most nutritious feed ingredients for fish, for us is going too far.
Dominique, what's your view on how the cost of the alternatives will there eventually be like a price convergence where the price of fish meal and fish oil reaches the level of the alternatives, or do they kind of converge in the middle, or are there other ways of doing it? For example, you can put in, it's not maybe a straight replacement as such, but just different formulas. I know that Supplier Aqua does so much of this work. I thought you'd have a view.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been hearing it for 30 years since I've been involved in this. The alternative ingredients expect that with increasing in scale, their price is going to decrease. But many of the companies are also expecting fish meal to increase in price. And while the price of fish meal has increased very significantly since I got started, we started about $500, $550 a ton. Now it's $1,800, $2,000, depends on the quality of the fish meal. But they're expecting the fish meal to go to 3,000 and 4,000 in order to be competitive. So I think there's a little bit of basically expectations that price will go through the roof, and they're going to be competitive at that point in time. And that has not materialized that much. But yeah, a number of commodities, a number of new ingredients will see their price decrease. They'll find ways to reduce their costs, but some of them involve a pretty significant industrial apparatus that requires energy and highly specialized equipment and all this. And when you compare this to some of the, I work with plant proteins and land animal proteins. I mean, they don't require that big of an apparatus, right? You require a field and a harvester, some fertilizers and stuff, where, right, if you have to grow everything in stainless steel vessels, well, you have a finished level of production. You need a pretty big investment in order to make this economically viable. So I think a number of the alternatives will become competitive. They'll produce enough volume, they'll manage it. But I would think 9 out of 10 of the new venture will basically not be competitive. They may, some of them, use as functional ingredients, like we have for many fermentation products, yeast and the like. They're used at 2, 3, 5 kilo per ton as functional feed additives. They're expensive. They contribute like maybe $15, $20 to the cost of feed, but they're used at very low level. and that's going to be the avenue for this. But the volumes are going to be very, very low, and you're not going to get very much adoption in the broad market, like Kevin was saying. Some fish feed formulations are very simple in China, India, Bangladesh, even Indonesia, and Vietnam. They're actually very simple, and the high-end ingredients are not affordable because the feed is there's a market price for the feed, and you have to produce a feed under that market price. So you can imagine, oh, I'm going to produce the best feed and I'm going to add all this. The market is not going to be able to afford it, or at least you're not going to be competitive in the market, and you're not going to make a footprint.
Thank you. And I'm going to just allow one more question. I'd like to pretty much give the same question to Luis. In terms of, like, do you see from an industry producer perspective, $3,000, $4,000 fish meal and some kind of convergence for the alternatives?
So during my time at TASA, we did do some modeling of prices, but we never got to those levels. And I believe the one of the FAO reports, now the name escapes me, and it's public information, also did a calculation on fish meal prices, and I don't think it ever reached those levels. For me, because a $2,000 fish meal does exist, but I would probably say that's Alaskan pollock that's used for a very specific application in eel feed. But I think a typical price, or more like I'd say more a price that reflects like an equilibrium in price and demand, which means you're looking, China's going to consume about 1.8 to 1.9 million tons of fish meal a year, and the rest of the world will be able to supply that. Then I think you're looking more around $1,500 a ton. And will that increase a bit? Yes, I think it will, but to $3,000 or $4,000 a ton, by that point, I think other ingredients will have lowered their prices to enter the market. So, and I think that's one of the challenges right now is a lot of those other ingredients, being the insects that you need so much power. You need power to generate the food for the insects, for example, or the bacteria, depending on which technology you use, that requires a lot of energy as well. If you're going to sell that at $3,000, you'd better have a amazing amino acid and nutritional factors profile to be able to compete. And because, like I said, I think fish meal will always tend to revert back to that around $1,500 price. Granted, right now it's higher. I think the average price in a super prime in Peru is around $1,650. So yes, we're in a situation where the price is a little bit higher, but it's for $1,500 for me is kind of like a go-to price that all ingredients should kind of go for. And if those novel proteins can't get to that level, then I'd be a little bit concerned.
Right. And on the oil, is it different?
I think the oil. I think is going to depend. The oil it depends so much on the EPA DHA profiles because you either go to the feed industry or you sell to the human consumption industry. And although the human consumption industry never blew up in terms of demand as we thought it would, and I'm talking about 10 years ago when a lot of fishing companies invested in generating higher quality omega oil in the sense of refining and concentrating. The demand has been growing, and I think the whole COVID the pandemic really pushed the use of supplements for your personal health. So I think that's driven a lot of demand there. But again, the price of algae oil, I think from the last time I looked at it, was still far off the price of fish oil. So will it get there? I hope so, because we're going to need it. But they were still. I thought they were pricing themselves completely at a premium that was way beyond what for example, the salmon guys would need to hit those certain EPA DHA levels.
Right. Thanks very much. Great answer. So I'd like to now bring this to a wrap. Just one more mention. Again, very appreciative of F3 being the sponsor to this webinar. And I'd like to really thank all of our participants today. I think it's been a great discussion. I think we've covered the topics nicely. And again, a big thank you for taking part. I really appreciate it. And many thanks to our audience for listening in. This webinar is available as a recording on YouTube. I would imagine that Undercurrent News would upload that reasonably soon. Yeah, just look out for that. It will come. It will be under the Undercurrent News channel on YouTube. Again, thanks very much to everybody, and wish you a good day.
Thank you.